Iran just announced they hit 2 American bases last night, Kuwait and Jordan. But here's what the headlines aren't telling you. This wasn't just another strike. This was a specific message. And the people in Washington who heard it, they're not sleeping. Quick thing before we get into it. Drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually do read them. All right, let's walk through what really happened. So there was an announcement yesterday out of Iran, state television, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They said they carried out fresh attacks on U.S. bases in Kuwait and Jordan. Now, just reading that sentence, it sounds like more of the same, right? We've been hearing this for months. Rocket attacks, drone swarms, the usual back and forth. But let me tell you why this one is different, and why the Pentagon is actually scrambling right now in a way they haven't since October. The IRGC went public with specific details, not vague threats, not general bravado. They named the bases. They named the equipment they hit. They even named the hangars. Ali Al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait. They said they destroyed a military equipment warehouse, a Patriot air defense system, and a hangar housing MQ-9 Reaper drones. They also claimed they struck personnel accommodations and helicopter hangars at Uderi Camp, also in Kuwait. And they said U.S. troops were killed and wounded. Now think about that for a second. They claimed casualties, American casualties, on Kuwaiti soil. Then they went further. They said they hit bases in Jordan too, destroyed THAAD systems, CRAM radar systems, another Patriot battery. Look, I've been covering this region for a while now, and when the IRGC starts releasing that level of operational detail, they're either telling the truth, which is terrifying, or they're building a narrative for something even bigger. But here's what I want you to understand, and I mean really understand, because the news cycle is going to move fast on this. It already is. The U.S. hasn't confirmed anything yet. As of right now, there's no Pentagon statement, no White House briefing, no official acknowledgement of these claims. That silence, that's not nothing. That's a choice. And in a minute, I'm going to explain why the U.S. military is probably in damage assessment mode right now, why they can't just fire back immediately, and why this might be the moment the entire rules of engagement change. But first, I need you to understand the context, because this didn't come out of nowhere. Let's go back, way back. Because the tension between Iran and the U.S. in this region, it's been building for months, years, honestly. But there was a specific moment last year that shifted everything. And I think a lot of people missed it. So here's the thing about the IRGC. They're not just some military branch. They're the ideological backbone of the Iranian regime. They answer directly to the supreme leader. They have their own navy, their own air force, their own intelligence apparatus. And they've been running what amounts to a shadow war against the U.S. and its allies for decades. But last year, something changed. The U.S. started repositioning assets. More Patriot batteries in the Gulf, more THAAD systems in Jordan, more drone operations out of Kuwait. And the Iranians noticed. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for them. I'm not. But if you're in Tehran and you see American air defenses being set up on two sides of your country, and you see MQ-9 Reapers flying surveillance missions along your border, you're going to interpret that as encirclement. Whether that's accurate or not isn't really the point. The point is that's how they read it. And then you had the nuclear thing, the centrifuges, the uranium enrichment levels, the IAEA reports that kept getting more and more concerning. The U.S. and Israel kept saying all options were on the table, and Iran kept saying they weren't backing down. So this has been brewing. It's been brewing like a pressure cooker with a broken valve. But here's the thing that most news outlets won't tell you. There was a warning months ago, and almost nobody paid attention. In December, the IRGC released a statement, kind of buried in Iranian state media. They said their missile forces had been practicing complex, coordinated strikes on hardened targets. Now, at the time, analysts kind of shrugged, but they specifically mentioned Patriot systems. They specifically mentioned hangars. They specifically mentioned bases in Kuwait. I went back and read that statement this morning, and I got to tell you, it reads like a blueprint for exactly what they announced yesterday. So when I hear people say, oh, this came out of nowhere, no, it didn't. The signs were there. They were just easy to ignore until they weren't. All right, let's go through the actual attack, what the IRGC claims happened, because the details matter, and I'm going to walk through them one by one. They say they hit Ali al-Salem Air Base. That's in Kuwait. It's a major U.S. hub. It's been a key staging ground for operations in the region for decades. And they claim they hit a military equipment warehouse, a Patriot air defense system, and a hangar housing MQ-9 Reaper drones. Now, if that's true, and I'm saying if, because the U.S. hasn't confirmed anything, if that's true, that's a massive hit. The MQ-9 is the backbone of U.S. surveillance and strike capability in that theater. Losing a hangar full of them, that's not just equipment damage, that's a capability gap. And then they said they hit Udari Camp. That's also in Kuwait. It's a major base for personnel. They claim they struck personnel accommodations and helicopter hangars. And they explicitly said U.S. troops were killed and wounded. Let that sit for a second. If they killed American service members on Kuwaiti soil, that's a red line. That's the kind of thing that changes everything. But wait, they didn't stop there. They also claimed they destroyed THAAD and CRAM radar systems and another Patriot battery at bases in Jordan. Jordan. That's a different country, a different theater. That means this wasn't just one strike. It was coordinated, simultaneous. Two countries, multiple targets. Now here's where it gets interesting. And I mean genuinely interesting. Not just, oh, this is complicated, interesting. Why would they hit Jordan? What's in Jordan? Well, Jordan has been quietly hosting U.S. air defense assets for a while now. THAAD systems, CRAM, Patriot batteries. It's part of this layered defense network the U.S. has been building in the region. The idea is to create this umbrella of protection over Israel, over Saudi Arabia, over the Gulf states. And the Iranians just claimed they punched a hole right through it. So here's my question, and I want you to think about this with me. Why now? Why Kuwait? Why Jordan? Why all at once? I have a theory, and I'm just going to say it. I think Iran is testing the U.S. response time. I think they're probing the American commitment to defending its Gulf allies. And I think they're doing it publicly, on camera, through state media, because they want the whole world to see what happens next. And that's the dangerous part. Because whatever the U.S. does next, or doesn't do, it's going to be watched by Iran, by Israel, by Saudi Arabia, by China, by every country in the region that's trying to figure out whether the American security guarantee is still real. Now let's talk about the U.S. position, because it's more complicated than you might think. The Pentagon hasn't confirmed anything. The White House hasn't confirmed anything. As of this recording, we haven't heard from CENTCOM. And that silence it's loud. There's a few reasons they might be quiet. Maybe they're still assessing damage. Maybe there are casualties and they're working through notification protocols. Maybe they're debating the response. Maybe they're getting intelligence that says this wasn't the whole attack, that there might be more coming. Or maybe they just don't know what to say yet. And I think that last one is actually the scariest. Because if the U.S. isn't sure about the extent of the damage, if they're still figuring out what they actually lost, then the Iranians might have gotten more than just a headline. They might have gotten a military victory, and they're going to use that. Let's talk about the political pressure here, because this is where it gets really intense. President Harris is going to have to respond to this. And I don't just mean a statement. I mean a response. Militarily, diplomatically, publicly. The whole world is watching. But here's the problem, and this is the part that keeps me up at night. The U.S. is already stretched thin. There's the situation in Ukraine. There's the tension in the South China Sea. There's domestic politics. There's an election coming. And now you've got Iran claiming to have struck American bases in two countries. It's not just one crisis, it's a cascade. And the Iranians know that. They absolutely know that. This isn't random. This is calculated. They looked at the U.S. posture. They looked at the U.S. commitments. And they decided that this moment, right now, with everything else going on, was the right moment to force the issue. And honestly, they might be right. But let me take a step back, because I don't want to just dump all this on you and leave you there. I want to explain what this actually means for the bigger picture. Because here's the thing about the IRGC. They don't just fight with missiles and drones. They fight with narratives. They fight with perception. They understand that modern warfare isn't just about what you hit. It's about how it's perceived. So when they release all these specific details, hangars, equipment warehouses, Patriot batteries, THAAD systems, they're creating a story of U.S. vulnerability. They're saying, look, we can hit your most advanced systems. We can hit your personnel. We can hit you in 2 countries at once. And what are you going to do about it? And if the U.S. can't respond convincingly, if the response is too small or too delayed, then Iran just changed the equation. For everyone, not just for the U.S., for every ally in the region, for every adversary watching. And that's the real stakes here. This isn't just about Kuwait. This isn't just about Jordan. This is about the entire American security architecture in the Middle East, and whether it still works. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm frustrated by how this is being covered. Most outlets are just running the headline. Iran says it struck U.S. bases. They're not explaining the layers. They're not explaining the history. They're not explaining what happens next. And that's why I wanted to do this video. Because I think you deserve to know what's actually going on. Not just the surface, not just the official talking points, the real thing. Now, let's think about Israel for a second, because they're going to be watching this very, very closely. Israel has been warning about Iran's nuclear program for years. They've been saying the window is closing. They've been threatening preemptive strikes. And if Iran can hit U.S. bases in Kuwait and Jordan with impunity, Israel's calculation changes. They might decide that the U.S. can't protect them anymore. They might decide to act alone. And if that happens, we're looking at a regional war. Not a proxy conflict, a real war. Saudi Arabia is watching too. The Gulf states are watching. The UAE is watching. Everyone in that region is trying to figure out if the U.S. will hit back, and if it does, how hard. Because if the U.S. doesn't respond, or responds too weakly, every country in the region is going to start looking for other security partners. And that's bad for America. It's bad for global stability. It's bad for everyone. All right, let me walk you through what the U.S. options actually are. 1, they can launch a military response. Strikes on Iranian assets in Syria. Strikes on IRGC facilities in Iraq. Maybe even strikes inside Iran itself. That's the aggressive option. That's the one that says, don't ever do this again. But that also runs the risk of escalation. of Iran hitting back harder, of this spiraling into a full conflict. 2, they can respond diplomatically. The UN, sanctions, international pressure. But Iran has been under sanctions for years. It's never stopped them before. And right now, with Russia and China backing Tehran, diplomacy might not be enough. 3, they can do nothing, or something so limited it's basically nothing. And that's what worries me most. Because if the U.S. doesn't respond, Iran just got a green light. They just got permission to keep pushing. And they will. And then there's the 4th option, the one nobody wants to talk about. The U.S. could retaliate silently, covertly, cyber attacks, intelligence operations, assassinations, the kind of thing that doesn't make the news. And honestly, that might be what we see. Because publicly hitting Iran right now is incredibly risky. But not hitting them at all is also incredibly risky. So the compromise might be to hit them in the shadows. But here's the problem with shadows. They're not a deterrent. Iran won't be deterred by something they can't see. They need to see the response. They need to feel the cost. And if they don't, they'll keep doing this. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a dangerous moment. The kind of moment that historians point to later and say, that's when things changed. And I'm not being dramatic. I'm really not. I've been watching this region for years. I've seen the cycles of escalation and de-escalation. I've seen the warnings ignored. I've seen the miscalculations. And this feels different. Because the Iranians aren't just attacking bases. They're attacking the credibility of American power. And credibility, once lost, is really hard to get back. Now let me circle back to something I mentioned earlier, the warning signs, because I think this is the part that's going to haunt a lot of people. There were intelligence reports. There were assessments. There were briefings. The U.S. knew Iran had been pre-positioning missiles. They knew the IRGC was practicing complex strikes. They knew the Patriot systems were vulnerable. They knew. And yet, here we are. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in the decision chain. I don't know why the U.S. didn't take more precautions. I don't know if there was a breakdown in intelligence, or a miscalculation by commanders on the ground, or just plain hubris. But I do know that this is the result. And the result is that Iran just claimed to have scored a major victory against the United States on 2 fronts. And we're sitting here waiting for a response that hasn't come yet. Let me talk about the casualties for a second, because this is the part that might be most explosive. The IRGC said U.S. troops were killed and wounded. They didn't give numbers. They didn't give names. They just said casualties. Now, if that's true, and the U.S. confirms it, the domestic pressure on President Harris will be immense. Americans don't like seeing their service members killed in the Middle East. It's been a long war. We're tired of it. And a president who looks weak in the face of American deaths, that's a political crisis. But if it's not true, if Iran is lying, then we have a different problem. Because then Iran is using fake casualties to escalate the narrative, to force the U.S. into responding to something that didn't actually happen, which might be even more dangerous. Because then the U.S. has to figure out how to respond to a provocation that wasn't actually real, but might as well be because the world believes it is. And that's the thing about modern warfare. Perception is reality. What Iran says happened matters, even if it didn't, because the people watching this conflict don't have access to the battlefield. They only have access to the statements, and the statements are already shaping the next phase of this crisis. All right, I want to shift gears for a second because I need you to understand something about the IRGC's internal politics. The IRGC isn't just a military organization. It's a political one. It has its own factions, its own internal power struggles, its own ambitions. And right now, there's a faction inside the IRGC that wants to prove that they can stand up to America, that they can hurt the U.S., that they can change the balance of power. This attack might be about external enemies, but it's also about internal rivals. It's about who gets to decide Iran's future. And that makes it even more unpredictable. Because when an organization is fighting for its own survival, it takes risks. And it doesn't always care about the consequences. So what I'm saying is, Iran's leadership might not be fully in control of this. The IRGC has its own agenda. And that agenda might be different from what the government in Tehran wants, or even what the supreme leader wants. And that's a terrifying thought, because it means there might be people with their fingers on triggers who don't answer to anyone. Let me talk about the allies, Kuwait and Jordan. Kuwait just got hit on its soil. American bases inside Kuwait were attacked. And if Kuwait was even slightly involved in supporting those bases, they're now a target too. But here's the thing. Kuwait is a U.S. ally. They've hosted American troops for decades. They've been a vital partner in every major operation in the region. And now Iran just said, we don't care about your sovereignty. We'll hit whoever's hosting the Americans. That is a message, not just to the U.S., to every country in the region that's thinking about hosting American troops. The message is, if you let them in, you're a target, and we don't care about your borders. Jordan is in the same boat. They've been a quiet but essential partner for the U.S., and now Iran is claiming to have hit bases there too. So what do those countries do now? Did they ask the U.S. to leave? Did they try to distance themselves? Or do they double down and hope the U.S. retaliates hard enough to make Iran back off? I don't know, honestly. I don't think they know either. And that uncertainty is exactly what Iran wants. They want everyone confused. They want everyone scared. They want everyone second-guessing their alliances. Because a world of scared, confused allies is a world where Iran wins. All right, let me wrap my head around the global implications for a second. Because this isn't just about the Middle East. China is watching. Russia is watching. They're both backing Iran in various ways, and they're both looking for cracks in the American alliance system. If the U.S. doesn't respond effectively to this, China and Russia will see it as weakness. They'll push harder in Ukraine. They'll push harder in the South China Sea. They'll push harder in Taiwan. This one attack in Kuwait and Jordan could have ripple effects that go way beyond the Middle East. And that's what keeps me up at night, honestly. Not the immediate damage, not even the casualties, as horrible as that is. It's the second-order effects, the things we can't see yet, the doors this opens for other adversaries, the precedents it sets. Because if Iran can hit U.S. bases and face no serious consequences, what's to stop North Korea? What's to stop Russia? What's to stop anyone? This is the line right here, and we're about to find out if the U.S. is willing to enforce it. Now look, I'm not in the Situation Room. I'm not in the White House. I don't have access to the classified briefings. But I do know how these things usually play out. And I know that the first 48 hours are always the most critical. The decisions made right now, in the next day or two, will determine whether we're looking at a tit-for-tat exchange or something much, much bigger. So I'm going to be watching closely. And I hope you are too, because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Let me end with this, and I mean this. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. We're in a new phase of the conflict with Iran, a phase where they're willing to directly attack U.S. bases and then announce it publicly, a phase where they're claiming casualties, a phase where they're testing the American will to fight. And the next few days are going to tell us a lot about the U.S., about Iran, about the future of the Middle East, and honestly, about the future of the global order. So keep watching. Pay attention to what the Pentagon says or doesn't say. Pay attention to the allies. Pay attention to the markets. And pay attention to the things that aren't being said, because those are usually the most important. All right, that's where I'm at with this. I've been going back and forth all day on what to make of it. And honestly, I still don't have a clean answer. I just know it's serious. And I'm not sure people are taking it as seriously as they should. I'm going to keep watching this in real time. And when we have actual confirmation from the Pentagon, or when the response happens, I'll be here to break it down. So stick around. Drop a comment and tell me what you make of this whole thing. I really do want to hear what you're thinking, because I know I'm not the only one who's been staring at the news all day trying to figure out what comes next. This isn't over. And honestly, I don't think it's even really started yet.